Have you ever wondered what happened to the recipes that once defined American kitchens? The ones carefully printed on faded recipe cards, passed between generations, then quietly forgotten. Today, we're stepping back into a time when simple ingredients created unforgettable meals, guided by one iconic name, Betty Crocker. These aren't just recipes, they're stories of family dinners, post-war kitchens, and a slower, more meaningful way of cooking. But somehow, they vanished. And what we've lost might surprise you. So before these flavors disappear forever, let's uncover 10 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes you need to try now, and trust me, number 1 will take you back instantly. It began with a dish that once sat proudly at the center of American dinner tables, yet today, almost no one remembers its name, Betty Crocker's noodle ring with creamed chicken. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, this recipe wasn't just food, it was presentation, pride, and practicality combined. Housewives across America followed Betty Crocker cookbooks religiously, trusting that every recipe would impress both family and guests. And this one certainly did. Imagine a ring of buttery egg noodles, baked until golden and firm, shaped perfectly in a round mold. Once flipped onto a serving plate, the center would be filled with a rich, creamy chicken mixture, thick, warm, and comforting. It wasn't just a meal, it looked like something prepared for a special occasion. What made it truly special was how it reflected the post-war mindset. Ingredients were simple: noodles, milk, canned chicken, or leftovers, but the goal was elegance. Families wanted meals that felt abundant, even when budgets were tight. This dish delivered that illusion beautifully. There was also something quietly satisfying about its structure. The act of unmolding the noodle ring without it falling apart was almost a small victory in itself. And when it held its shape, filled perfectly with that creamy center, it felt like a moment worth remembering. But as decades passed, convenience foods changed. Frozen dinners replaced homemade presentations. Recipes like this, ones that required patience and a bit of care, slowly faded away. Today, the noodle ring with creamed chicken feels almost like a relic. Not because it lacked flavor, but because it belonged to a time when even the simplest meals were made to feel special. And maybe that's exactly what we've forgotten. Long before quick dinners came in boxes or bags, there was a dessert that felt almost magical the moment it touched the oven. Yet today, it's nearly forgotten: Betty Crocker's hot milk sponge cake. In the early 1950s, this cake was a quiet staple in American homes. It wasn't flashy or overly decorated, but it carried something far more important: reliability. Home bakers trusted Betty Crocker to deliver recipes that worked every single time, and this one rarely failed. The secret was simple, yet unusual. Warm milk was folded into a light, airy batter just before baking, creating a texture that was both delicate and rich at the same time. As it baked, the kitchen would fill with a soft, comforting aroma. Subtle, but impossible to ignore. Unlike modern desserts overloaded with frosting, this cake stood on its own. Sometimes it was served plain, with just a dusting of sugar. Other times, families would add fresh berries or a spoonful of jam, depending on what was available. It was flexible, forgiving, and quietly elegant. What made this recipe special wasn't just the taste, it was the feeling it created. It was the kind of dessert you'd find waiting on the table after dinner, sliced carefully, shared slowly. No rush. No distractions. Just conversation and comfort. But as baking trends shifted toward convenience and excess, recipes like this began to disappear. Box mixes replaced careful techniques, and simplicity lost its place in the spotlight. Today, the hot milk sponge cake feels almost like a whisper from the past. Not because it was forgotten by accident, but because it belonged to a time when less truly meant more, and every bite carried a sense of home. There was once a salad that didn't look like anything we would recognize today, yet it appeared proudly at family gatherings, church suppers, and holiday tables: Betty Crocker's perfection salad. In the 1930s and 1940s, this dish was considered modern, even elegant. Guided by the trusted recipes of Betty Crocker, home cooks embraced gelatin as a symbol of progress. It was new, exciting, and strangely beautiful. At its heart, perfection salad was a molded creation, lemon-flavored gelatin holding shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes celery in a firm, glistening shape. Once chilled and turned out onto a plate, it shimmered under the light, often served with a spoonful of dressing or mayonnaise on the side. To us, it might seem unusual, even unsettling. But back then, it represented creativity and control. Refrigeration was becoming more common, and gelatin dishes showed off this new convenience. It allowed families to prepare something ahead of time, something that looked impressive without requiring last-minute effort. There was also a deeper purpose. During lean years, stretching ingredients mattered. This salad used simple vegetables but transformed them into something that felt refined. It wasn't just about taste, it was about presentation, pride, and making the ordinary feel special. Over time, however, tastes changed. Fresh, crisp salads replaced molded creations. The idea of vegetables suspended in gelatin slowly lost its appeal, becoming more of a curiosity than a classic. Today, perfection salad stands as a reminder of a different kind of kitchen, one where innovation looked very different from what we expect now. It may not return to our tables, but it tells a story of how people once reimagined food in ways that still feel strangely unforgettable. There was a time when a simple sandwich carried the weight of comfort, thrift, and quiet ingenuity, a recipe born not from luxury, but from necessity. Betty Crocker's mock chicken sandwich. During the years surrounding the Great Depression, many American families couldn't afford meat regularly. Chicken, once a Sunday staple, became something rare. But the craving for familiar flavors didn't disappear. So home cooks turned to creativity, guided by trusted names like Betty Crocker. This sandwich didn't contain chicken at all. Instead, it relied on chopped hard-boiled eggs, mashed with mayonnaise, a touch of mustard, and sometimes finely diced celery or onion. The texture was soft, the flavor surprisingly rich, and when spread between slices of bread, it carried just enough resemblance to chicken salad to feel comforting. What made this recipe remarkable wasn't imitation, it was adaptation. Families weren't trying to fool anyone. They were finding ways to hold onto familiar meals in unfamiliar times. Sitting around the table, sharing something that tasted close to what they remembered, brought a sense of normalcy that went beyond the food itself. There was also a quiet dignity in it. Turning inexpensive ingredients into something satisfying required skill, patience, and care. It showed that even in hardship, meals could still feel thoughtful and complete. As prosperity returned and real chicken became affordable again, recipes like this slowly disappeared. They were no longer necessary, and perhaps people wanted to forget the times that created them. Today, the mock chicken sandwich feels like more than just a recipe. It's a reflection of resilience, a reminder that even when something is missing, people find a way to recreate the feeling of having enough. There was once a casserole that promised warmth with every spoonful, a dish that quietly filled kitchens with the scent of baked onions and melted cheese, Betty Crocker's onion soup bake. In the 1950s and early 1960s, casseroles became a symbol of comfort and efficiency. Families were growing busier, yet dinner still held importance. Recipes from Betty Crocker offered a solution: simple ingredients, minimal preparation, and a result that felt deeply satisfying. At first glance, this dish seemed almost too humble. Sliced onions layered into a baking dish, covered with a creamy mixture often made from canned soup, then topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers. But as it baked, something changed. The onion softened, releasing a natural sweetness, blending with the rich, savory base beneath a golden, slightly crisp topping. It wasn't flashy. It didn't demand attention. But once served, it had a way of surprising people. The flavor was deeper than expected, comforting in a way that felt familiar even on the first bite. This recipe reflected a shift in American kitchens. Convenience foods were becoming more common, and casseroles embraced them fully. They allowed families to stretch ingredients, reduce cooking time, and still gather around something warm at the end of the day. There was also a sense of quiet togetherness tied to dishes like this. A single pan placed at the center of the table, everyone serving themselves, conversation flowing without interruption. It wasn't about presentation, it was about presence. But as tastes evolved and fresh ingredients replaced canned shortcuts, recipes like onion soup bake began to fade. They were seen as outdated, too simple for a new generation. Today, it remains a forgotten comfort, proof that even the most modest ingredients could once create something unexpectedly unforgettable. There was once a pie that didn't rely on fruit, cream, or even chocolate, yet it managed to feel rich, comforting, and surprisingly complete: Betty Crocker's vinegar pie. Long before modern baking aisles were filled with endless options, many households had to work with what was already in the pantry. During times like the Great Depression, fresh ingredients were often scarce. But the desire for dessert never disappeared. With guidance from Betty Crocker, home cooks found ways to create something out of almost nothing. At its core, vinegar pie was built on illusion. A mixture of sugar, eggs, butter, and a small amount of vinegar was poured into a simple crust. As it baked, something unexpected happened. The sharpness of the vinegar softened, blending into a tangy sweetness that closely resembled the flavor of lemon. For families who couldn't afford citrus, this was more than clever, it was comforting. It gave them a taste of something they missed, something that felt just a little more luxurious than their circumstances allowed. There was also a quiet magic in the process. Watching such basic ingredients transform into a smooth, custard-like filling felt almost impossible. It reminded people that creativity could fill the gaps where resources fell short. Over time, as fresh lemons became easily available and baking evolved, vinegar pie slowly disappeared from everyday kitchens. It was no longer needed, and like many recipes born from hardship, it faded into memory. Today, it stands as a forgotten reminder of resilience. Not because it was extravagant, but because it proved that even in the simplest moments, people could still create something that felt like a small, sweet escape from reality. There was once a drink that blurred the line between dessert and refreshment: thick, frothy, and unexpectedly rich: Betty Crocker's chocolate frosted malt. In the 1940s and 1950s, soda fountains were more than just places to grab a quick treat. They were social spaces, filled with laughter, music, and the hum of conversation. Inspired by those moments, recipes from Betty Crocker brought that same experience into the home kitchen. This wasn't just chocolate milk. It started with cold milk, chocolate syrup, and malted milk powder, blended together until smooth. But the real magic came at the end: a scoop of chocolate ice cream or a swirl of whipped topping, creating a drink that felt indulgent without being complicated. The texture was thicker than a shake, lighter than a dessert, and perfectly balanced in between. For many families, this drink became a small ritual. Served in tall glasses, sometimes with a straw or a long spoon, it turned an ordinary afternoon into something memorable. It was the kind of treat that didn't require a special occasion, yet always felt like one. There was also something deeply tied to its time. Malted drinks reflected a fascination with new flavors and textures, influenced by diner culture and the growing popularity of at-home blenders. It was modern, convenient, and just a little bit exciting. But as decades passed, tastes shifted. Prepackaged drinks replaced homemade blends, and the slow ritual of mixing something by hand began to disappear. What was once a simple pleasure became something rarely revisited. Today, the chocolate-frosted malt lingers as a quiet echo of soda fountain days. Not just a drink, but a reminder of when even the smallest indulgences were enough to turn a moment into a memory. There was once a dish that tried to bring the taste of the sea to dinner tables far from any coastline, a recipe that felt both inventive and strangely comforting: Betty Crocker's tuna wiggle. In the 1940s and 1950s, canned foods became a staple in American homes. They were affordable, long-lasting, and easy to use. With guidance from Betty Crocker, home cooks learned how to turn these pantry staples into complete meals that could feed an entire family. Tuna Wiggle was exactly that. At its core, it was a creamy mixture of canned tuna, white sauce, and peas, all served over soft egg noodles or toast. The name itself, Wiggle, came from the way the sauce moved slightly on the plate, a small detail that somehow made the dish more memorable. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't meant to impress guests. But it did something more important. It filled stomachs and brought families together at the end of long days. There was a certain rhythm to preparing it. Stirring the sauce until it thickened just right, folding in the tuna, watching everything come together into a warm, steady consistency. It was predictable, reliable, and that mattered. For many households, this dish became a weeknight essential. It used ingredients that were always on hand, required little time, and delivered a flavor that felt mild but comforting. But as fresh seafood became more accessible and cooking trends shifted toward lighter meals, Tuna Wiggle slowly lost its place. Its simplicity, once its strength, began to feel outdated. Today, it survives mostly as a memory. Not because it lacked flavor, but because it belonged to a time when practicality shaped every meal and comfort didn't need to be complicated to be meaningful. There was once a dessert that didn't need an oven, didn't rely on complicated steps, yet somehow became a favorite at potlucks and family tables: Betty Crocker's Icebox cake. In the 1930s and 1940s, refrigerators, often called iceboxes, were becoming a common part of American homes. With that shift came a new kind of recipe, one that didn't require baking at all. Trusted guides like Betty Crocker helped popularize desserts that used cold instead of heat to transform simple ingredients into something special. The icebox cake was beautifully simple. Layers of crisp chocolate wafers were stacked with freshly whipped cream, one after another, forming a tall, unassuming structure. Then came the hardest part: waiting. Placed in the refrigerator for hours, sometimes overnight, the dessert slowly changed. The cookies softened, absorbing the moisture from the cream, turning into delicate, cake-like layers. By the time it was sliced, it no longer looked like cookies and cream. It resembled a perfectly formed cake, with soft, even layers that felt almost impossible given how little effort it required. What made this dessert memorable wasn't just the taste, it was the transformation. Watching something so simple become something so refined felt almost like a quiet kind of magic. It also reflected a new pace of life. Instead of standing over an oven, families could prepare dessert ahead of time, letting it rest while they focused on other things. It was convenient, yet still felt homemade. But as ready-made desserts filled store shelves, recipes like icebox cake began to fade. The patience it required was replaced by instant options. Today, it lingers as a forgotten classic, a reminder that sometimes the most remarkable dishes were the ones that asked you to simply wait. There was once a dessert that looked playful on the outside, but carried a deep sense of nostalgia in every bite: Betty Crocker's pineapple upside-down cake. In the mid-20th century, home baking was at its peak. Families gathered around ovens, waiting for simple ingredients to turn into something special. Recipes from Betty Crocker became trusted companions in kitchens across the country, and this cake quickly became one of the most recognizable. What made it unforgettable was its dramatic transformation. At the bottom of the pan, rings of pineapple and bright red cherries were carefully arranged with brown sugar and butter. Then came the batter, poured gently over the top. During baking, something magical happened. The sugar caramelized, the fruit softened, and everything fused together into a golden, fragrant layer. But the real moment came after baking. The cake had to be flipped. With one careful motion, the pan was turned upside down, revealing a glossy fruit topping that had once been hidden. The caramelized surface glistened, almost jewel-like, turning a simple cake into a centerpiece that felt far more impressive than its ingredients suggested. For many families, this dessert became a symbol of celebration. It was served at Sunday dinners, birthdays, and gatherings where small joys mattered. It carried a sense of pride, proof that something beautiful could be made from pantry staples. Over time, as baking trends changed and modern desserts became more elaborate, pineapple upside-down cake slowly lost its everyday presence. It remained known, but less often made from scratch. Today, it stands as a nostalgic reminder of a time when presentation, patience, and a little bit of kitchen magic could turn the simplest recipe into something unforgettable. From creamy casseroles to desserts that transformed in silence overnight, these forgotten Betty Crocker recipes were more than just meals, they were moments in time. Each dish carried the spirit of a generation that cooked with patience, creativity, and whatever was available in the pantry. Today, they may feel distant, even unusual, but they remind us how food once brought families together in the simplest yet most meaningful ways. If these stories took you back into those nostalgic kitchens, don't forget to stay connected. Subscribe for more forgotten recipes and untold food history that time almost erased, but memory never truly let go.